I am Dr. Elizabeth Ward, the Executive Director of the museum. We are Zoom recording this tonight because we know that it's going to be a great conversation, and we'll be putting it up on our website afterwards. So I don't know if I'm in the Zoom camera or not. But I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I want to say that we are on the ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people, who were stewards of this land for thousands of years. We are on the unceded homeland called Thamien, and we are honored that we have had an opportunity over the last 5 years to work with the Muwekma Ohlone in particular. Some of their images you'll see on our screens, and they did a blessing when this exhibition opened a year and a half ago. They did a blessing for us, and we're just honored that we've had an opportunity to try to mend some of the historic wrongs that have been done to the native peoples of this area. In particular, tonight we're talking about economy, and one thing that I think tends to get overlooked with the native peoples is that they had a very robust economy. So I love, in this case over here, you can see some of the shells that were used as monetary exchange methods for their trade network that went all the way up to the Sierras, all the way down to Southern California, and they had a very robust economy themselves. So we are in the footsteps of their traditions, as we have, of course, a much more dynamic and bigger economy today. But it's an honor to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about how our economy has changed in the last 20 years. And I just thank you for giving me an opportunity to do a land acknowledgement tonight. Okay, so we have two great presenters for our discussion pleasure, and then we're going to be going downstairs for some more food and wine. I appreciate very much our team docent, Amy E., being here tonight. So Amy has been a team docent with us since 2022. Our team docent program allows high school students to get involved in the museum and take people through our exhibits, and also gives them learning opportunities like this and chances to get involved in our various programs. So Amy, you've been stellar at grabbing those opportunities, and we really appreciate so much all the work you've done as a team docent. Thanks for being here tonight. We also have with us Ethan Barron from the Mercury News, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but he did grow up in Los Altos Hills. I don't know if anybody saw the Town Crier newspaper. He helped get the fountain put up in front of the library when he was a junior high school here. Wow. Help with fundraising for that. So you were already thinking money even back then. Yeah. So there we had that on Facebook, and a couple were commenting. I remember Moosey.
Yeah, that was what they called me.
Yeah, was his nickname, Moosey. So, and he was working in Canada for several years, and he came back to the San Jose area about 10 years ago.
Yep.
And has been doing economic reporting since then. And you can tell a little bit more about some of the other changes you've had with your coverage of all the different things you're covering right now for the Mercury. So that's going to be part of what we're talking about as well, is also how the newspaper industry has also been affected by our economy. So I'm going to let Amy take our conversation away. Thank you guys both so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, so I'm a student journalist myself. I write for the LA Talon. You might know this because you were in Los Altos, but I guess my first question is, what got you into journalism in the very beginning? Like, how do you find your passion here?
Yeah, well, I started where you did. So I took the newspaper class at Los Altos High, and I loved it. And that was sort of the first point where I realized that I really liked writing, and then so going through college, writing became more important as I sort of got past the general ed classes, and then I started to realize that like writing was a thing that you could constantly get better at, and you could get better sort of over time, but you could also like take any particular piece of writing and make it better. And right. I've had editors who have like told me that I will not relinquish the story until they have to pry it out of my hands, because I'm like always wanting to make it better. But so that was the thing. It was like, here's this job where you can constantly improve your performance, but at the same time, any particular bit of work you're doing, you can make it as good as you can within the amount of time you have. And so that like, so sort of the basics of journalism really appealed to me. And then I began to realize how much I liked writing. And then I took a journalism class, my last semester in school in college. And it was fantastic. It was kind of revelatory. I was like, I love this, and I want to write as a career. But at the same time, I would like, I grew up there. I would spend like all summer on the back deck, like reading novels. And actually, more than all summer, I spent all my free time basically when I was running around hunting rattlesnakes and things. I was reading novels, and so I was like, well, I should be a novelist or I should be a journalist. And then, so at that point, I was done with college. I was like, I got to make a choice here. And so journalism offered a way to make a living, with a steady paycheck. And then I figured if I wanted to write novels, I could do that in my off hours or during breaks and things. And it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. So then I went to journalism school at Berkeley, and it was as soon as like from the first day of class, I realized that I found the career that I wanted to be doing. It was just endlessly fascinating to learn about, and then it was a hands-on program, so it was endlessly fascinating to work on, and I found that I was good at it. My writing skills, I translated over, of course, and I just the ability to just like sort of go into random situations and report on them, as we discussed earlier. It's a thing that most people don't get to do. So that's how I made that. Once I got into school, I knew I was going to continue in that. And so, because I had thoughts of being a lawyer for years, and then even though like all my loved ones are lawyers, but most of them, I then the journalism just appealed to me more. So that's how I started with that. Yeah, from where you started, and then sort of a logical progression.
Keep it going, yeah.
Yeah.
How has your career changed over time? What are some valuable lessons you've learned from journalism as your time, working in the field and stuff?
So, I mean, I spent like, most of the first part of my career up until like a few years ago, really writing about like people killing each other. I mean, a lot of death and mayhem and terrible things happening to people. And so that was, for years. So I graduated from Berkeley, and then I worked down in Watsonville for about a year, and then I moved to Canada. And so I spent 20 years up there working. And so for the first 10 years, it was a lot of like, covering breaking news, which was a lot of crime. And I did trials and like, so I spent 2 years writing about the serial killer and, looking at his greasy head every day in the courtroom. It was all this repulsive, horrific evidence. And so all of that happened. And then in the meantime, I'd like always really enjoyed traveling, and then I started to get opportunities to go overseas to do journalism. And so once I started getting work like that, I did as much as I could to make that as much of my job as I could. And so, I've been to Africa a bunch of times, freelancing and working as a staff reporter and photographer, and Afghanistan a few times, doing the same, kind of, let's see, New Zealand, and I've spent a lot of time in Africa. So that was like, up until the pandemic happened, I was spending as much time overseas as possible. And then when I came here, I started doing business reporting for the first time. And so it was essentially because I wanted to get back into newspapers in the United States, and the Mercury News had a job opening. So I was working for a website that was covered business schools, MBA programs, like at Stanford and Harvard and things. And so that was very interesting. Sort of got my foot into the door with business, and then the job came up at the Mercury News. And I'd written this article for the company, the website that I was working for, about the dean at the Stanford Business School, who got up to some shenanigans with the wife of another professor, and he had to resign. And so I wrote this kind of expose on that. And then when I went into the interview with the Mercury News, the editor's like, "You're the guy that wrote that story." their reporter interviewed me about that story. And I ended up sitting next to that reporter when I took the job there. So it was all sort of an interesting little circle. So that's how I ended up there, covering business. Hadn't really done, I covered business school for a couple of years, but didn't cover business or the economy, or certainly not tech. And when I grew up it was aerospace and military contracting. That was like the economy around here. And it was like, it was, you know, pre Silicon Valley. There were still orchards in a lot of places. And so that, you know, that of course is, the economy is transformed into something completely, well, there are definite similarities, and there's still a lot of military contracting. But so then when I took the job, my job at the Mercury News was to cover technology. And so for a while that was just like Google and Apple, and then they started moving people into housing. We can talk because the staff was shrinking, and so I ended up being sort of the sole tech reporter. And now I've sort of been moved into a different department, which is more about writing features and things. And I'm also covering tech. But so now we actually the paper of record in Silicon Valley does not have a dedicated tech reporter, which is pretty shocking and appalling. But we're owned by a hedge fund, and that's the way it is with this company, which owns newspapers all over the country. So, well, I think we're going to talk about that later. But so that's kind of how the trajectory and back and forth and up and down has gone.
Okay, sure. Through your time as a tech reporter, working on tech and stuff, how have you seen tech change the landscape in Silicon Valley? How has it kind of affected the job market here? How has it affected the growth of companies here? What people choose to go into?
I mean, it's sort of taken over everything, and so and you know, it's really miraculous, the things like, you know, we have supercomputers that we carry around in our pocket, and you know, we can find friends and relatives that we've not seen for 20 years, and there's all these amazing things that have come out of Silicon Valley that are just, you know, sort of world changing. And so here in the economy, you know, sort of the most obvious effects of the tech industry are probably property values, because, you know, this is an economy, this is a business where people are highly paid, and there are tons of people, and the nice leafy cities around here are reluctant to build high rises, which is understandable, but also very problematic, because it means that the property values and rents and you know, the cost of buying a house or living here are super high. So so what that means for the economy is that you have highly paid workers who can live here. Most of the other people, many, I shouldn't say most, I don't know the percentage, but a very large number of people that are sort of occupy different parts and roles in the economy, service jobs, you know, restaurants, everything you can imagine, hairstylists, you know, everything that sort of like is a basic service job for anybody. Like, a lot of those people then have to live elsewhere because they can't afford to live here. And so then we have this like just really terrible traffic, which is partly made up of people commuting from their homes to the tech companies, but a lot of it is people commuting from long distances, just to get to work from where they live and then get back. And then also, you know, you have places like a lot of people living in Palo Alto. Palo Alto has not built very much housing. Mountain View's done a little better, but so you have a lot of people who are then living in the city, or living in San Jose, or living in Morgan Hill, or even there's people living in Stockton and Fresno and things that are commuting to jobs here. And you know, even people that are reasonably well paid are still having to commute to jobs in the most expensive places because they can't afford there, but they can afford, like, you know, Santa Clara or something.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned people kind of coming into this area because of the tech openings here.
Yeah.
Jobs. Tell me a bit more about that. How has that changed the economy?
What is the question?
How has the influx of people to work in tech changed the economy? And I mean, the home prices is the thing that's, you know, stands out the most. But I mean, one of the really like beneficial effects of it has been diversifying the population here. Like, when I grew up, well, Los Altos High, I think we had 3 black kids, and then Mountain View shut, and we got half or AWOL, I can't remember when the high school shut. We got half of the students, and so we all of a sudden got way more diverse, which was great for everybody. We hadn't had virtually no experience with any other races. Like, this whole school full of white kids, and that was sort of like a lot of Silicon Valley, or a lot of the Bay Area was like that at the time. It was mostly white, it was middle and upper class, and so the tech industry has brought people from all over the world here, and so it's a much more vibrant place culturally. And so, and economically, it's just made this an extremely wealthy place where there are, enclaves of extreme wealth, like more extreme. Like when I grew up in the hills, we had, my dad was a doctor. We had a lawyer living across the street. There were some engineers for NASA and things. And so these were people that were, they're paid well, but then actually the thin edge of the wedge, he was a wonderful man, was this Korean immigrant guy who came to Silicon Valley. Well, he was sort of one of the people who birthed Silicon Valley. He was a software engineer, and he bought a property next door and built this giant mansion. And he at the time had he'd come with nothing. He bought companies, sold companies. He was worth like $500 million, and that was like unheard of back then. And now we have people living in Los Altos that are making like half that amount in salary and stock options in a year. So there's been a sort of the economy has become more prosperous, but also the wealth has become more extreme, and so you have sort of it's more of it's a less kind of integrated middle and upper classes where people sort of mix. Now you have people that just they live in their large estates and don't really mix much with anyone else except for the elk who live far away. So
Okay, absolutely. So a lot of these immigrants are coming in on H-1B visas. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? How are these immigrants how do they interact with them? Are they being exploited by them almost? Like, tell me a bit more about the nature of these visas and how immigrants are being affected by them.
Yeah, well, so that visa, so there are 85,000.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, so it's the H-1B visa. It's intended for skilled workers, and it's mostly used by tech workers. And so it's also in research universities get a lot of H-1B visas. So the employer gets the visa on behalf of a skilled worker. And so this has been a real boon for Silicon Valley. And so the intent of it is that you have the best and brightest from around the world can come to the United States and be employed, and then they'll be on a path to a green card. And so that still works, but it's been sort of the visa has been exploited by companies like large and small. So the most sort of direct exploitation is by these staffing companies they're providing workers for projects for other companies. And so those are companies of, from 10 people to, multiple millions of people, like all the way up to, Google and Facebook use a lot of those contractors. They also hire a lot of H-1B visa workers themselves who are like, who are the cream of the crop from around the world. So, but the problem is that for the workers who don't have the freedom to like move around the world because they're at the very highest levels of their field, you have a lot of these lower level IT people who are on this visa and they're sort of at the mercy of their employer. If they want to stay in the United States, the employer can basically treat them however they wish. And so, there's research that like a lot of those workers, like 30% of the workers on that visa are receiving under the prevailing wage for their field. But also you have these, Silicon Valley wouldn't be what it is without that visa, or another way to get these people to stay here. I mean, the interesting quirk also, and a very unfortunate quirk for Indian people, is the green cards are apportioned out on a country by country basis. And so the vast majority of H-1B workers are from India. Second is China. And so if you're an Indian person on an H-1B, you want to get a green card. It can take you years. If you're older, you'll never get one. So for some people, it's in certain fields it'd be like decades. So that's the problem. There's a ceiling that the green card cannot. The green card program did not envision like massive differences in the country of origin of the skilled workers that were coming to this country. Yeah, and India has incredible universities and a giant population, and so So if we want the cream of the crop is like is real cream. Like there are extremely bright people working here that came from India that got fantastic educations there, or came over here and got educated here because there are programs to sort of get people into the tech industry, the optional practical training visa for college students. And so that, in short, the visa it's used for its intended purpose, but it's also exploited. And the fixes are extremely politically difficult because anything to do with immigration is just like a mess in this country. So, the idea of reforming it or bringing more people in under it, generates opposition and from various places in the political spectrum.
For sure. So if we have workers from other countries coming in to take positions here, how is it affecting workers who are born here, kind of grew up in Los Altos or in the Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that's a topic of very hot debate. So how does the presence of workers from other countries affect U.S. workers, right? American workers, and probably people that immigrants that are on green cards already that are already here. And that's a matter of extreme debate. And so the tech industry is always saying that they have a shortage of skilled workers, and then there's research that says, well, there isn't that much of a shortage, but there's also the fact is that like other countries are producing massive numbers of super skilled workers, and a lot of them end up here. And it's really, there's been no conclusive answer as to like whether those people are having a highly negative effect on the job market for people that are educated here. I mean, the solution really is to educate people here. And so we have plenty of US workers for the tech industry, but that also means a less diverse tech industry. And one of the things that's become apparent in the last 10 years about businesses of all different kinds is that diversity is super important to the performance of a company. Not only because you have people with bringing different ideas and different perspectives from different countries and cultures to any particular job or company or department in a company, but you also have markets now in America that are that are like Indian and Indian American, Chinese American. Like if you're Google, you don't want to have just a white bread population. Like you want to have people that know these cultures and know how your products are going to be received by them.
Right. How has that kind of affected the way companies are hiring? Is there any like affirmative action going on?
The companies do. They say they do their best. Like Google led the way about like probably 7 years ago. They started publishing their statistics on hiring and on their workforce composition, and so that was revolutionary. And they're like, here are our numbers. They're not that great, but we're going to do better. And so it's like 2% black or something compared to 12% in the U.S. population, and I think like slightly more of that of Latino and Latina. Women were much lower than men and still are. So like Google put it out there and said, we're going to get better. And they've gotten a little bit better on women, but not much better on underrepresented minority workers. So that there's an effort to do that. But it's also like their primary selection is based on what that person can do for the company to make that company make more money. So and you have shareholder pressure, so that anything that's perceived by shareholders as weakening the position of the company, they're going to get pushback on. So and of course then you have people like Elon Musk now who are really pushing hard against diversity efforts, and so there's a whole sort of concerted campaign to kind of wipe out these programs, and a lot of companies are pulling back. I haven't seen that among Bay Area companies necessarily, but I think Meta may have shrunk down some of its diversity programming. So that they say they want to do it, but the bottom line is always the most important thing, and so that's always going to trump any other efforts. And now the politics make it more difficult. And shareholders are also, aware of that, and they don't want the company to be weakened by, for instance, Planet Fitness is kind of a discount gym, just had an issue with like a transgender person was allowed to use the women's restroom, and they just lost like $400 million in market capitalization, in the space of a couple of days over that. So these are things that companies are very sensitive to, and so like nobody's being very loud about diversity anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so you kind of mentioned housing earlier, and where there's kind of like a housing crisis going on right now. Houses are more expensive than ever. I guess what caused that? Like, what are the factors that you think have resulted in houses being almost unaffordable to the new generation these days?
I mean, it's under building.
Repeat the question.
Oh, why is there a housing crisis? Why are houses so expensive now? And so, I mean, the answer is really simple. It was like decades of very little new housing being built. And so, among the the worst offenders, I was like, Palo Alto is sort of egregious. Which one? I think it was Atherton's council said that they couldn't build because it was the whole town was sensitive cougar habitat. And so that didn't fly, because now there's this mandate, a state mandate that a certain amount of housing has to be built. And cities are pushing back really hard on that, trying to get out of it any way they can. That's what pushed Atherton to that kind of absurd length. But so it is really that. It's like, because really, like if you start creating density in Los Altos or Palo Alto, it changes the character of a place that they came to, they live here for a reason. They don't want it to change, and you can understand that. But at the same time, that's the reason that the prices are so high, because like there's been resistance to upzoning, to allowing like multifamily housing in places that are traditionally single-family housing.
How do you think these high housing prices are going to be affecting younger generations in the future who are, trying to get houses here but probably can't afford to?
Yeah, that I think is a lot of I mean, I've seen research about young people who are now sort of accepting that they'll never own a home, and like your option as a young person is like you could work at a lower paid job that you may not want in a place that you don't want to live and own a house. Or you can rent for the rest of your life in some place where you do want to live, and you're probably going to make better pay. And so, like, it is like, but the thing is, like, there is now more housing being built sort of as we speak. I don't know the actual numbers, but it's improving. That housing, and there's like, innovations like the accessory dwelling units, like the little, backyard houses and things. And so Santa Cruz has done really well with that. Other cities are trying to get more and more of that. And so there are innovations that are going to help the situation, and there is more being built, but it's going to be a while. So it may be that like someone of your age, by the time you're like in your 30s, maybe the situation will have been remedied to some extent. Let's hope. But if things hadn't changed, it would have been out of reach. But there's been it's become so dire.
Right.
Yeah.
When will you be taking questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Soon, I think.
Very soon. Okay, for sure. So kind of on the topic of housing and the economy, how has COVID impacted the economy since, as we all know, it's been a pretty important event in recent years?
Yeah. I mean, in the Bay Area, the biggest effect, how has COVID impacted the economy?
You gotta repeat the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So the biggest and most obvious effect has been like the change to remote work, where you now have like even companies that are requiring people to come into work, it's usually only 2 or 3 days a week. And a lot of people have gone fully remote. So that means that the market for office space has gone way down. So there's vacant office space all over the Bay Area. At the same time, COVID like shut down public transportation for quite some time. It scared people away from it. It changed people's habits. And also people who are working remotely are now on sort of like different schedules. And so the move back to transit is happening very, very slowly, and all projections are that it's not going to get back to the use levels of before. So all the transit agencies are really struggling right now because their fare revenues are down, their ridership is down, and so they're cutting routes and they're cutting service, and so buses and trains take, there's longer in between, and so that deters people even more from wanting to take transit. And so right now there's kind of a movement to unify all the transit agencies, like 27 of them in the Bay Area, under one umbrella. That umbrella is the Metropolitan Transportation Agency, and many of the transit agencies don't want to be under their control. So the idea is to unify everything, so you have like one card gets you into every sort of bus, train, light rail thing, and that the schedules are integrated, so you could easily get around the whole Bay Area, by train, then on bus or whatever. So those have probably been the two biggest changes from COVID on the economy, like the change to remote work, and for a lot of people, it's money in their pocket too. So I don't think there's been any research on how that's translated into like spending in other like smaller businesses by people that now are they're taking home more money because they don't have the commuting costs. But that there's no doubt more money going in. But it also, a lot of people moved out to the suburbs, and so where like a lot of small businesses are struggling in the Central Bay Area, and those types of businesses are doing much better in, say, Contra Costa County, where a lot of people move. But there's also like the retail's dying for a number of reasons, including what happened with COVID, mostly e-commerce. So, yeah. That's why you notice all the empty storefronts. Yeah.
I hate to see the empty storefronts everywhere, especially in the middle part.
Yeah. I mean, it's remarkable, isn't it? So, yeah, I wrote about that like 6 months ago or something. And I used Mountain View as she asked about empty storefronts, seeing so many of them, Menlo Park in particular, and wanted me to talk more about that. And so when I wrote about that a few months ago, I used Mountain View as an illustration because like right at Castro Street in El Camino, there was this incredibly blighted old muffler shop. It's like, welcome to Mountain View, but that's everywhere now. Los Altos has a few, but those places are mostly being like on El Camino being redeveloped. And some of the places like El Camino is a real problem so the reason is like, COVID, so e-commerce like decimated retail. People start buying everything online. It comes to you. You don't have to go to a store. COVID like accelerated that because everyone was at home, and then they're ordering things online, even if they had been usually going to get things, going to the hardware store. Now they're ordering online from Target.
I have a couple questions based on historical perspective. I worked for Hewlett Packard for 5 years in the 70s. I have two sons, and one was the 200th employee at Google. And guess what? He went out and set up his own multi-million-dollar business and been very successful. He has 3 people working for him who are in their late 40s and 50s. They're totally obsolete in this environment here, and I think everybody in the room, or most people, know why. And so you've got a whole, kind of what happens to these people. So question. So my question is, what in your research and in your writing is there? Because the companies don't care about them. So what happens to these displaced companies? My son is employing 2 or 3 of them in his business, but that's a disturbing trend to me when a whole bunch of employees, not that old, are just obsolete. So is that something we just have to accept, or what can be done about it?
Okay, that's an interesting point, and that's something that I could have answered in the about how the tech industry has changed Silicon Valley. But on the retail, everybody that looks at that and studies it says it's never coming back. Like there's people are buying things online now, and that's the way it's going to stay. And also, like the infrastructure for retail buildings is old and decrepit. So everything you see along El Camino that's got an empty storefront, if someone wants to move a business into there, it's going to cost a fortune to get that up to code and to get it into a space that anyone would want to use. So that's like those empty storefronts. But there are certain parts of the economy that are doing well, like gyms, service things, nail salons, those kinds of things. Will start moving into those. You know, some types of retail, flower shops sometimes are more immune for whatever reason to that trend. But anyway, so one of the big demographic changes here in Silicon Valley is the young population. And so many, like you walk into Google, the first time I went there, I was like, I saw one guy with gray hair. I was like, what's going on here? And it's like, it's young people from all over the world. And they're the ones that have studied like all the modern like software engineering. And so all the technologies, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of older workers who could be uptrained on the new stuff, but it's much easier for the companies to just hire young workers. And so you have a lot of older and not retirement age workers who are going into other fields or retiring early. Yeah, so. Do we want to go to questions?
Well, you had one more, I think, about the local newspapers. Didn't you have one more question?
Local newspapers. How has media? That's right. How has newspapers and the way we consume media changed the way that newspapers are advertised?
Yeah.
Especially like online newspapers and like how often we get paper newspapers these days.
Yeah. So there are like two main things that are happening with the news media, and they're both bad. And the news media is dying. And it's a really terrible thing for democracy, because if we want informed voters who are making informed decisions when they're going to the ballot box. And so that traditionally has come from news media. Like, you know, you read the newspaper, you watch the TV news, you learn about what's happening in the community, in your state, like in every level of government, and you know, around the world. And so so social media fragmented everybody's attention. People are then looking at this in a lot of their spare time that they would have been reading, consuming news media in whatever form. And so that's one thing that happened. The other thing that happened is that the internet took advertising out of newspapers and off the TV and put it on your screens. And so it's digital advertising. And so that is where all the advertisers' money goes now. Everybody wants the eyeballs that are online, the newspaper readers, and it's a sort of downward spiral, because as the newspapers shrink. So the Mercury News used to have like 400 something editorial staff, so editors and reporters. And so now and that was like 20 years ago. Now there's like 1/10 of that. And so, you know, we've gone from, even just in the past few years, like 2 floors in a building in downtown San Jose to like 1/3 of a floor for both advertising and editorial. So my dog used to go down to the bottom of the driveway and pick up the newspaper, and on Sunday he couldn't hold 2. Like, and so now he could hold like 10 if he was still around. Like the newspapers are tiny. I mean, you see it. So what's happened is that Google and Facebook have taken the vast majority of all the internet advertising. And so everything's gone digital. Google and Facebook capture all that. So they, like, the last number I saw is that they're right around 50% of global, more in the United States. Like, of all the digital advertising revenue in the whole world, Google and Facebook get both of that. They get half of that. Amazon has become a big player in advertising too. Now all the advertisers want to be on Amazon because everybody is looking at Amazon. And so, like, all that has gutted the revenue streams for newspapers. It started with Craigslist. You can see Craig Newmark, the guy who started it, he's like consumed by guilt. And so he's got this foundation that's trying to prop up media. And so kudos to him, but the real damage came from Google and Facebook. And newspapers that didn't anticipate that this was going to happen and allowed them to like host the content. And then the advertising on the newspapers themselves, TV websites, is a fraction of what it is that Google's getting. So, yeah.
So, okay, yeah, we're gonna open it up for questions. I first want to thank Amy, our TV reporter. Because the trends that Ethan's talking about are going to be affecting Amy more than anybody else, and we really appreciate the perspective you brought and the ideas you had of just trying to understand the world you're about to inherit. And we know it's in good hands with somebody as smart and sensitive and thoughtful as you. Thank you for taking time this evening to prepare some really good questions for us. I know that our volunteers downstairs are getting some food out and about for us as well, and I wanted to quickly mention. I asked Ethan, what restaurants did you really, really like here in Los Altos? And he mentioned
The Black Forest.
the Black Forest, which is no longer here. The closest I could find was Esther's German Bakery. So all the food downstairs is German in honor of you. And there's beer and pretzels and all of that. So just to definitely want to keep our conversation going, definitely happy to answer a couple questions, but I also don't want to keep us from food for too much longer. So, so thank you, Amy. And okay, so there was a question here. Yeah?
Small statement.
Okay.
What worries me is that the news I can tell you. I know young people don't watch TV news. They don't have a TV. It's amazing. But it worries me that when they're using social media for news, they're picking what they want to read about or hear about. When you watch television, you turn it off and then it's accurate. You can't turn off or what somebody on TV is saying. You can get it all, and you just listen to it all, or maybe you wash dishes while you're watching TV. But it worries me because there are things that are happening in the world that you're not going to bother even reading about because it doesn't concern you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real problem.
Saying?
Everybody is consuming information in their own bubble,
Right,
from their friends and
that's
family.
how
And there's also, Silicon Valley is now all in on AI, this generative AI that, you put a prompt in and it sucks up all the information that's ever been produced by anybody, most of it copyrighted, and then gives an answer. And so this is now being used very aggressively for misinformation and disinformation. And so we're going to see a lot of it probably by the time the presidential election rolls around. So the bubble issue is a problem on social media. It's going to become even more of a problem when so much of that information, and it already is, there's so much incorrect information, biased information that doesn't really tell the whole story and makes people think things that aren't actually true. So yeah, it's a big problem.
So where is AI going?
Let me. Oh, that's a good question.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for your meeting. Good questions. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Particularly appreciate both that you're constantly writing up ideas. Is you have a habit of looking at things from a bunch of different sides, which is a pretty cool thing for journalists.
Oh.
So now I'm going to ask you an impossible question because I like you, but I'm going to torture you. Okay. So here's the thing. So I've run some startups.
Okay.
And I believe in diversity a lot. It would be just and fair, but it's so wasteful not to, right? There's presumably smart people who are women and black, and why wouldn't you have those people being smart for you, right? Yeah. So, but here's the dilemma. By the time you're at the company stage hiring, a whole lot of society is happening, right? We're building chips. I can't hire people who don't know how to build chips. That's what we do, right? Yeah. And if the output of the machinery that teaches people how to build chips is spitting out highly biased sets of people who can do that, I'm kind of stuck, right? I can't hire people who do it, right? And so the dilemma is the people who want it, say Google, you mentioned them, but big companies, small companies, who want the tech, would like a better output of that whole system. Yeah. Right? Clearly what's happening is talent people are being discarded along the way that we could hire, they could do great things. Yeah. And yet, is it the company's responsibility to fix that whole thing? Or should they be going back at society? What the hell are you doing now?
Extremely good question.
So how do we fix that?
So that's it's described as the pipeline issue.
Yeah.
So people fall out of the pipeline or they never get into the pipeline. And so that then the reasons for that are rooted in the unequal opportunity in this country. So if you're poor, if you're black, if you're Latino or Latina, your chances of getting into a good school are much lower, mostly because of money, and also because a lot of schools where, like, basically a lot of schools where brown people live have poor quality education, and so you have, like, everybody's not getting an equal chance to get into that pool that the company is going to be able to choose from. And so this is a super important point, that you can't put it all on the companies. Like, and they do try. Like, the Google would love to say, we're up at like 12% black software engineers now, but the pool is not representative of the population. And
when
so
you were studying MBA programs, was that part of what you were looking at when you were reporting on the MBA programs?
yeah, that was one of the things that I would write about fairly frequently. A lot of it to do with gender, because that's where the biggest, most obvious deficit is, like women in MBA programs, and then women getting into the kinds of jobs that come when you have an MBA. So, I mean, there is, like, structural inequality and structural racism in this country, and that needs to be addressed if we want to have a pool of, potential startup or Google workers who represent the same diversity that we have in the country. So this is a great question. Yeah, and where's AI going?
Where's AI going?
It could be taking us straight to hell. The thing is, like, so there was a lot of hype, and so one of the things that's happening is you have these AI companies that are saying, like, Sam Altman from OpenAI is like, this could destroy humanity, and Elon Musk is doing the same thing, and, like, a lot of high-profile people in that industry are holding this up as, like, the big risk, and so that is, a lot of that is and they're like, we're the only ones, you need to trust us to solve this problem. We're going to build things that aren't going to, like, come murder you in the night, and so. But
That's a low bar. That's a really low bar.
Yeah. Since that's like the more likely consequences in the immediate future are sort of low-level jobs, like an advertising copywriter. They're already being replaced at some places by ChatGPT, because, like, and you're getting egregious examples of why you shouldn't do that, but like those things, the promise of their ability to do these sort of quasi-human tasks is looking further off in the future. And so, like, a lot of these companies are, like, funding is slowing down and growth is slowing down, because there was just this huge boom and everybody's like, AI is the new thing, Silicon Valley's new giant, shiny object. And so, but it's still getting better all the time. It can still do a lot of tasks pretty well, mostly writing, but also some computation stuff, even software writing. Needs to be checked. The output needs to be checked by people who know what they're doing. But the amount of work necessary to get done for a lot of different kinds of work is now being taken up by software. And so that has a lot of implications for jobs.
Just mention, well, how could go wrong with AI is Google, Gemini AI, is starting to get pictures of the founding father with black people and so on, and just destroy there.
Yeah, that was like, there was a huge problem for them.
I mean, that was cool.
So I think we'll probably head downstairs to continue our conversation. I would like to kind of ask, just on a little bit to Lou's point about how the economy has changed over the last 20 years. I'd like to just wrap up with really quickly your assessment of, if you were, to Larry's point about how complicated all these different parts are, over the last 20 years, what do you think is sort of the biggest change? Would you put it in our local economy? What would you say is the biggest change in our local economy in the last 20 years?
I mean, it's probably that that Silicon Valley has become like a global center for talented people, and before it was a national center for talented people who were involved in engineering and other people, because it's an awfully nice place to live. So there were a lot of people who wanted to be here. But now Silicon Valley is a magnet for people from all over the world, but also the attention of people from all over the world. Like there are tourists who come and they go to the the Google Android garden, and it's got sculptures, and they go to of like the Android little critters and things.
Yeah.
And then there are tourists who go every day. You can go. If you go by the Facebook campus, the Meta campus, and you see their sign out front. Every day there are tourists out there taking selfies and taking pictures of each other. Like it's now one of the most important places in the world, whereas it was just one of the most important places in the country before.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that.
Our exhibit on Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think the Wars of the Legends exhibits was very much in that time period where this was the national magnet, and now I think that's this international one. Thank you very much for that wonderful assessment.